Well, thanks for logging on to WKBN.com. I'm Storm Team 27 meteorologist Craig Zybert. And in this story, you're reading about El Nino, La Nina, and how that may impact our weather here in the spring. And one thing we want to take a look at here is a look at what is going to be happening here over the next several months. We are in a La Nina phase of the ENSO, which is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, which is basically just the in a very simplified way, it is the temperatures of the eastern Pacific Ocean. When those are a little cooler than normal and there's a cooler than normal propagation of water there on the eastern Pacific Ocean, that is when we are in a La Nina phase. When that changes to a warmer phase, that is El Nino. And as you can see here in this graph, right now we are at the end of a La Nina, and it's been a very weak La Nina, but that has been one of the influences of our weather pattern this winter. Now, as we go later into the winter months, into the spring, we're going to go back to a neutral phase, and eventually it does look like we are going to be preparing for an El Nino as we get into the spring and especially into the summer. You could see that as those probabilities begin to increase in the graph. Those numbers, those letters that you see there at the bottom, DJF, FJM, they correspond to the months. So DJF, December, January, February. And so as we get into, you could see there MAM, March, April, and May, you're going to start seeing the probabilities of an El Nino begin to increase for us, and especially as you get towards that MJJ, May, June, July, and especially into July and August, El Nino pattern does look like it wants to be favored. So what does that mean for us here? Now, I went back and looked at a bunch of different years that have a very similar setup going out of La Nina into El Nino. You could read that in this story here at WKBN.com. But one of the general trends that we noticed, and here's a very general synopsis of what you're reading here in this story. One thing I do want to caution is that these transition seasons, fall and spring, do not have as prominent of patterns as what you would expect in the wintertime and the summertime. When you have an El Nino winter, you have a better general idea of what could happen. Same thing in the wintertime. Spring and fall seasons are not quite as straightforward. So some of the years that we looked at don't necessarily have the same correlations. The closest matches we have been cooler than normal from a general standpoint. It doesn't mean that all 3 months of the spring, which in meteorological terms is March, April, and May, have been warm or cold. But the closest matches overall as a season are cooler than normal, and the overall closest matches are drier than normal with some wet periods in between. You could read that again in this story here at WKBN.com. One of the other things that was interesting to note of all the years that we sampled here, that many of those years had active severe weather seasons, something that we'll continue to keep track of here at Storm Team 27 as we get into the warmer months. But that's just a general overview of what you're reading here at WKBN.com. We thank you for clicking here on our website.